The commander was furious. "There's a sniper operating out of this hospital," he said, slamming the folder on the desk. "A Taliban leader was eliminated yesterday, but no sniper team reported the operation." Everyone in the briefing room looked confused. Until one soldier remembered what he'd seen the night before, outside the surgical tent, when Dr. Sarah Chin removed her medical scrubs and carefully folded away something that looked nothing like hospital equipment. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you appreciate stories of hidden heroes who served in silence, consider subscribing for more incredible accounts every week. Camp Leatherneck Medical Facility, Helmand Province, Afghanistan. August 2011. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the dust haze when Captain Marcus Webb stormed into the hospital command tent. His jaw was set, his eyes hard with suspicion. Major Diane Foster, the hospital's chief medical officer, looked up from her paperwork with barely concealed irritation. "Captain Webb, this is a medical facility. Unless you're injured or bringing casualties, I'll ask you to schedule an appointment." "One of my targets was eliminated last night," Webb interrupted, dropping a classified folder on her desk. "Mullah Qadir Rahman. High-value target. Shot placement consistent with advanced sniper training. Problem is, no sniper team was deployed in that sector." Foster's expression remained neutral, though her fingers tightened slightly on her pen. "I fail to see how that concerns my hospital, Captain. The trajectory analysis puts the shot originating from within 200 meters of this compound." Webb leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Someone in this hospital is operating without authorization. Someone with level 1 sniper certification who's been running unauthorized night operations." "That's ridiculous," Foster said, but something in her tone suggested she wasn't entirely surprised. "My medical staff works double shifts saving lives. They don't have time for whatever conspiracy theory you're suggesting." "Dr. Sarah Chen." Webb pulled a photograph from the folder. "Your civilian trauma surgeon. According to my intelligence officer, she's been seen in unauthorized areas during off-duty hours. Last night, a sentry observed her leaving the surgical tent at 0300 hours, carrying what appeared to be equipment wrapped in medical supply bags." Foster stood slowly. "Dr. Chen is one of the finest trauma surgeons I've ever worked with. She's saved dozens of our people. Whatever you think you saw." "I don't think, Major. I investigate." Webb's eyes were cold. "I want her in the command tent in 1 hour. And I want her service record, unredacted." After Webb left, Foster sat motionless for several minutes. Then she picked up her secure phone and made a call she'd hoped she'd never have to make. Dr. Sarah Chin stood at the scrub sink, methodically washing blood from her hands. The young Marine on her table would live, though he'd never walk the same way again. The IED had shattered his femur and shredded muscle tissue, but she'd saved the leg. That was her job. Save what could be saved. "Dr. Chen." A nurse approached hesitantly. "Major Foster wants to see you in command. She said it's urgent." Sarah dried her hands slowly, her face betraying nothing. "Tell her I'll be there in 10 minutes. I need to check on post-op." She said, "Now, ma'am." Sarah met the nurse's eyes, seeing the concern there. Word traveled fast in a forward operating base. If Webb was asking questions, everyone would know within hours. "Understood," Sarah replied quietly. As she walked across the compound toward the command tent, several soldiers nodded respectfully. She'd earned their trust the hard way, through endless surgeries, impossible saves, and a calm demeanor that never broke even during mass casualty events. To them, she was simply Doc Chen, the surgeon who worked miracles with a scalpel. They didn't know about the other work. The other lives she'd saved by taking them. Inside the command tent, Captain Webb stood with his arms crossed, flanked by 2 military police officers. Major Foster sat behind her desk, her face carefully neutral. Sarah entered calmly, closing the tent flap behind her. "Dr. Chen," Webb began without preamble. Where were you last night between 0200 and 0400 hours? Sleeping in my quarters until 0300, then I was called in for an emergency surgery. A convoy hit an IED en route Bronze. 3 casualties. Before the casualties arrived, Webb pressed. A sentry reported seeing you near the perimeter fence at 0245 hours. Sarah's expression didn't change. The sentry was mistaken. I was in my quarters. Webb pulled out a tablet, showing grainy infrared footage. This is from our perimeter cameras. That's you, isn't it? Leaving the medical compound, heading toward the observation post on Hill 347. Sarah looked at the footage calmly. The resolution is poor, Captain. That could be anyone. Mullah Rahman was killed by a single shot at 0312 hours. The bullet entered through his left temple while he was standing in a doorway 847 meters from Hill 347. Webb's voice was hard. The wind speed, the angle, the timing, that's not a lucky shot. That's professional work. And you think a surgeon did this? Sarah's tone was measured, almost curious. Captain, I spend my days repairing damage, not causing it. Your personnel file is surprisingly thin for someone with your credentials, Webb continued. Georgetown Medical School, Trauma Fellowship at Johns Hopkins, 3 years at Massachusetts General. Then suddenly you volunteer for deployment to Afghanistan as a civilian contractor. Why? Some people want to serve, Sarah replied evenly. I had my intelligence team dig deeper. Webb opened another file. There are gaps in your record. Months at a time where you weren't at any of the hospitals you claim to have worked at. And your medical school classmates barely remember you. One said you were gone for a full semester during your 3rd year. Something about an overseas medical mission. Major Foster finally spoke. Captain Webb, unless you have evidence of wrongdoing, I'm going to ask you to let Dr. Chen return to her patients. I have evidence of unauthorized movement during a combat operation. I have ballistic evidence of a high-value target elimination that no one is claiming credit for. And I have a surgeon who can't explain gaps in her background. Webb turned back to Sarah. I'm recommending a full security review. Until then, you're restricted to the hospital compound. Sarah nodded once. Understood, Captain. May I return to work? Webb's jaw tightened, frustrated by her composure. For now. But Dr. Chen, if you're operating outside your authority, if you're conducting unauthorized combat operations, that's a court-martial offense. For everyone involved. His eyes flicked briefly to Major Foster, who remained carefully expressionless. Sarah left the command tent and walked back to the hospital. Behind her calm exterior, her mind was racing through contingencies. Webb was smart, thorough, and he wasn't going to let this go. The question was how much he could actually prove, and how much damage it would do to the program if he did. That night, Sarah completed 2 more surgeries. A lance corporal with a sucking chest wound and a staff sergeant who'd lost 3 fingers to shrapnel. Both would survive. Both would go home to their families. She saved them with the same hands that had, just 24 hours earlier, ended a life from nearly half a mile away. The duality didn't trouble her as much as it once had. Every target she eliminated was someone who wouldn't plant another IED, wouldn't ambush another convoy, wouldn't send another young soldier to her operating table. In her mind, it was all the same mission. Protect those who couldn't protect themselves. At 2,200 hours, Major Foster appeared at the entrance to the surgical tent. Dr. Chen, a word. They walked to a quiet corner of the compound, away from prying ears. Webb contacted JSOC, Foster said quietly. They stonewalled him, which only made him more suspicious. He's now convinced there's a classified program operating out of my hospital, and he's not entirely wrong. What do you want me to do? Sarah asked. Nothing. Continue your work. But be careful. Webb is one of those officers who believes in doing everything by the book. He doesn't understand the gray areas we operate in. There's nothing gray about what I do, Major. I'm a surgeon. Everything else is just rumors. Foster studied her for a long moment. Sarah, I've known what you really do here since the day you arrived. I've covered for you because the math works. For every target you eliminate, I see fewer casualties on my operating tables. But if this blows up, I can't protect you. I'm not asking you to, Sarah replied calmly. If it comes down to it, deny everything. You're a hospital commander. You can't be expected to know what every doctor does in their off hours. It won't be that simple, Foster warned. Webb is building a case. He's interviewed the sentries, reviewed camera footage, analyzed patrol routes. He's even looking at ammunition inventories. He won't find anything, Sarah said with quiet confidence. I don't use military ammunition or military weapons. Everything I need, I source independently. That's another problem, Foster sighed. If you're not using our equipment, where are you getting it? How are you getting it onto a secure military base? Sarah smiled slightly. With respect, Major, the less you know about the logistics, the better your deniability. 3 days later, Captain Webb returned to the hospital with additional evidence. He'd requisitioned satellite imagery of the surrounding area for the night of the Taliban leader's death. The thermal imaging showed a heat signature on Hill 347 during the time of the shot, a signature that disappeared shortly after. I had our tech analysts enhance the image, Webb told Major Foster, spreading printouts across her desk. This shows a single individual in a prone position, consistent with sniper posture. And here, he pointed to a series of images, you can see the movement pattern as they left the area, heading directly back toward this compound. Foster examined the images. This could be anyone, Captain. It could be an insurgent scout, a local shepherd, anything. At 0300 in the morning. In an area we've designated as a kill zone. Webb shook his head. And look at the movement pattern. That's military training. Proper use of cover, awareness of sight lines, textbook infiltration and exfiltration. So you think one of my doctors sneaks out at night to play sniper? Foster's skepticism was evident. Captain, my medical staff barely has time to sleep, much less conduct covert operations. Then explain this, Webb pulled out another document. Dr. Chen requested and received access to the hospital's Roof 4 astronomical observation. She submitted a request form 3 weeks ago, claiming she wanted to stargaze as a way to manage stress. That's not unusual, Foster countered. Mental health is important in deployment. If she wants to look at stars. The hospital roof has a clear line of sight to Hill 347, Webb interrupted. It's the perfect position to spot targets and plan approach routes. And I checked with the astronomy community. There were no significant celestial events during any of the nights she requested roof access. Foster felt the walls closing in. What exactly are you suggesting, Captain? I'm suggesting that Dr. Sarah Chen is not who she claims to be. I'm suggesting she has advanced military training that doesn't appear in any official record. And I'm suggesting that someone in the chain of command knows about it and has been covering for her. Before Foster could respond, an alarm sounded across the compound. Incoming casualties. Multiple trauma cases from a vehicle rollover during a patrol. We'll continue this later, Foster said, standing quickly. I have patients incoming. This isn't over, Major, Webb called after her. Nothing ever is, Captain. The next 6 hours were chaos. 8 casualties, 3 critical. Sarah worked without stopping, her hands steady, her focus absolute. She saved 6 of the 8. The 2 she lost died before they reached the hospital, their injuries too severe for any intervention. As she scrubbed out after the final surgery, exhausted and covered in blood, she found Captain Webb waiting outside the surgical tent. Impressive work, Doctor, he said, his tone less confrontational than before. I watched you operate. You're very skilled. Thank you, Captain, Sarah replied neutrally. Those hands save lives, Webb continued. Which makes it hard for me to believe they also take them. Sarah met his eyes steadily. I'm a surgeon, Captain Webb. Taking lives is contrary to everything I've trained for. Is it? Webb stepped closer, lowering his voice. Because I've been thinking about something. Every Taliban leader or bomb maker you eliminate, that's potentially dozens of our people who don't end up on your operating table. In a twisted way, you're still saving lives. Just by different means. Sarah said nothing, her face unreadable. I'm right, aren't I? Webb pressed. You're some kind of covert operator. Special operations background, maybe CIA, maybe something else entirely. And someone very high up approved you working here under medical cover. Captain, I think the stress of your investigation is leading you to see conspiracies where none exist. Webb pulled out his phone, showing her a photograph. This was taken in Kabul 3 years ago. A diplomatic security contractor named Sandra Chen, providing protection for State Department personnel. Same face, different name. According to records, Sandra Chen was a former Marine Corps scout sniper with 3 combat tours. Sarah glanced at the photo. The resemblance was undeniable. A lot of Asian women look similar to Western eyes, Captain. Sandra Chen disappeared from all official records 18 months before Sarah Chen showed up here, Webb continued. Officially, she was killed in a vehicle accident. Closed casket funeral. But I contacted the unit she served with. Several of her former teammates said they never believed she was actually dead. Interesting story, Sarah said calmly. But I'm not sure how it involves me. Dr. Chen, Webb's voice was urgent now, I'm not trying to expose you. I'm trying to understand. If there's a legitimate program, if you're operating with proper authority, I need to know. Because if you're not, if this is some rogue operation, people are going to get hurt. Possibly you. For the first time, Sarah's composure cracked slightly. And if I were to hypothetically confirm your theory, what would you do with that information? That depends on whether you're operating with authorization or not. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Captain, there are aspects of this war that don't fit neatly into standard operating procedures. There are missions that can't be officially acknowledged, operators who can't be formally recognized. Sometimes the best way to protect our people is to work in spaces the enemy doesn't expect. So you're saying you are authorized? I'm saying, Sarah chose her words carefully, that if someone were conducting the operations you're investigating, they would only do so with proper authority and oversight. And that person would have very good reasons for maintaining operational security. Webb studied her face. You're asking me to drop the investigation. I'm suggesting that some secrets exist for good reason. And that pushing too hard might compromise operations that are actively saving American lives. Before Webb could respond, Major Foster appeared. Captain, I just received a call from Colonel Harrison at Bagram. He wants to speak with you immediately. It's classified priority. Webb's expression shifted from suspicious to concerned. About what? He didn't say. But he emphasized immediate meant immediate. As Webb hurried toward the communications tent, Foster turned to Sarah. You need to leave. Tonight. I can't abandon my patients, Sarah protested. Your replacement is already en route. This is bigger than we thought. Webb contacted someone he shouldn't have, and now there are people asking questions at levels where we can't contain them. What are you saying? I'm saying your cover is blown. The program you're part of, whatever it actually is, they're pulling you out. You have 6 hours to sanitize your quarters and prepare for extract. Sarah felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Not of enemy action, but of exposure. Of losing the mission that had given her purpose for the past 2 years. I'm not finished here, she said quietly. Yes, you are, Foster replied firmly. And Sarah, for what it's worth, I've never seen a better trauma surgeon. You saved lives in that operating room. Whatever else you did, that part was real. That night, Sarah packed the few personal items she'd accumulated. Her sniper equipment had never been in her quarters. It was cached outside the compound, in a location only she knew about. She'd retrieve it on her way out. At 0200 hours, a helicopter landed at the far end of the base. No lights, minimal noise. Sarah walked across the compound one last time, looking at the hospital where she'd spent countless hours saving the broken bodies of young soldiers. As she approached the helicopter, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Captain Webb. Dr. Chen. Or should I say, Gunnery Sergeant Sandra Chen, Marine Corps Scout Sniper, retired. Sarah stopped. You should be in your debriefing with Colonel Harrison. I was. It was very enlightening. Webb moved closer. Turns out Sandra Chen didn't die in a vehicle accident. She was recruited into a specialized program. Deep cover operators placed in civilian roles on forward operating bases. Intelligence collection, high-value target elimination, all deniable. I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah said automatically. Colonel Harrison told me everything, Webb continued. After making me sign about 15 different non-disclosure agreements. Your program has eliminated 73 high-value targets in the past 3 years across 4 provinces. 0 collateral damage. 0 mission failures. Sarah remained silent. He also told me that the information I stumbled onto could get people killed. That there are other operators still in place, and my investigation potentially compromised their security. Then why are you here? Sarah asked. Webb was quiet for a moment. Because I needed to understand. I needed to know that what you did was legitimate, that someone was keeping track, maintaining oversight. I needed to know you weren't just a rogue operator playing God. And now that you know. Now I know that the system is more complicated than I thought. That sometimes protecting our people requires operating in shadows. He extended his hand. I'm sorry I doubted you, Sergeant. Sarah shook his hand. You were doing your job, Captain. Never apologize for that. Those surgeries you performed, Webb said, were those real? Or was that just cover? They were real, Sarah replied firmly. Every life I saved on that operating table mattered. The fact that I had another mission doesn't diminish that. Webb nodded slowly. For what it's worth, you were the best trauma surgeon we had. The Marines you saved, they'll go home to their families. That counts for something. It counts for everything, Sarah said quietly. The helicopter pilot signaled that it was time to leave. Sarah turned toward the aircraft, then paused and looked back at Webb. Captain, the targets I eliminated, they weren't just names on a list. Each one represented dozens of potential casualties. IED makers, ambush coordinators, suicide bomber recruiters. By stopping them, I prevented attacks that would have filled my operating room with more broken bodies. I understand, Webb said. Do you? Sarah's voice was intense now. Because the question you should be asking isn't whether what I did was authorized. It's whether it was necessary. And the answer is yes. Unequivocally yes. She climbed aboard the helicopter. As it lifted off, she looked down at Camp Leatherneck, at the hospital where she'd saved so many lives through surgery, and at the surrounding terrain where she'd saved countless more through a very different kind of precision. Captain Webb watched the helicopter disappear into the night sky. Then he walked back to the command tent where Major Foster was waiting. Is she gone? Foster asked. She is. And your investigation? Closed, Webb said. Colonel Harrison made it very clear that certain operations are above my clearance level and beyond my jurisdiction. Foster studied him. But you're not satisfied. I'm a by-the-book officer, Major. I believe in clear chains of command, documented operations, and accountability. This shadow program, these deniable operators, it all feels too close to the kind of moral compromises that get people in trouble. Sometimes moral clarity is a luxury we can't afford in war, Foster replied. Dr. Chen saved more lives than you know. Both in the operating room and outside it. I'm sure she did, Webb acknowledged. But who decides? Who determines which targets get eliminated? Who provides oversight? People with a lot more stars on their shoulders than you or I have, Foster said bluntly. And people who have to live with the consequences of both action and inaction. Webb was quiet for a moment. One more question, Major. Did you know from the beginning what she really was? Foster met his eyes steadily. I knew she was a gifted surgeon who saved lives. Everything else was need to know, and I didn't need to know. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're going to get, Captain. 3 weeks later, Captain Webb received a classified briefing document. It detailed the operations conducted by Sergeant Sandra Chen during her deployment. 73 confirmed eliminations. Each target package included detailed intelligence, authorization from JSOC, and post-action assessment. Target 47 was a bomb maker responsible for IEDs that had killed 8 Marines. Target 51 was a Taliban commander who coordinated ambushes on supply convoys. Target 68 was a kidnapper who specialized in taking local civilians who cooperated with coalition forces. The document also included something unexpected. A list of surgeries performed by Dr. Sarah Chen at Camp Leatherneck. Over 800 procedures. Survival rate 94%, significantly higher than the military average for forward surgical teams. The final page contained a handwritten note from Colonel Harrison, Captain Webb. What you uncovered was a program that exists in the space between conventional warfare and intelligence operations. These operators are carefully selected, extensively trained, and closely monitored. They operate with proper authorization and strict rules of engagement. They also accept that they'll never receive recognition for their work. They do it anyway. That's the definition of service. Webb closed the folder and locked it in his safe. He never spoke about the investigation again. 2 years later, a small ceremony took place at a classified facility in Virginia. Gunnery Sergeant Sandra Chen was awarded the Defense Superior Service Medal for her work in Afghanistan. The citation was heavily redacted, mentioning only exceptional service in a critical operational capacity. No details about the 73 targets. No mention of the sniper work. Just a quiet acknowledgement from people who understood what she'd really done. The officer presenting the medal was now Major Marcus Webb, who had been read into the program and now served as one of its oversight officers. Sergeant Chen, he said formally as he pinned the medal to her uniform, your service represents the highest traditions of courage and sacrifice. You operated in the shadows so that others could walk in the light. Thank you, sir, Sandra replied, standing at attention. After the brief ceremony, as others filed out, Webb remained. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I was so focused on the rule book that I nearly compromised a mission that was saving lives. You were doing your job, Sandra replied. We need officers who ask questions, who demand accountability. That's what keeps programs like mine from becoming something dangerous. How do you reconcile it? Webb asked. The duality. Surgeon and sniper. Healer and killer. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Every target I eliminated was someone who couldn't hurt our people anymore. Every surgery I performed gave someone a second chance at life. Both missions had the same goal. Protect those who serve. I never saw a contradiction. But the toll, Webb pressed. Carrying that weight. The toll would be higher if I'd done nothing, Sandra said firmly. If I'd watched more young Marines come through my operating room torn apart by IEDs I could have prevented. That weight would have been unbearable. Webb nodded slowly. The program continues. Other operators in other places. Is that what you do now? I train them, Sandra confirmed. Make sure they understand both the mission and the responsibility. Make sure they know that every target is a human being, and that decision to eliminate them has to be based on solid intelligence and clear necessity. And the medical training? Was that all just cover? No, Sandra said firmly. I'm still a surgeon. I still save lives when I can. But now I also make sure the next generation of operators understands that taking a life, even a legitimate target, should never be easy. The moment it becomes routine, the moment you stop questioning each decision, that's when you become something we don't want in the program. Webb extended his hand. Thank you, Sergeant. For your service. All of it. They shook hands, and Sandra left the facility. As she drove away, she thought about the young soldiers she'd trained, the lives she'd saved both in surgery and through sniper work, and the price that came with operating in the shadows. She'd given up recognition, awards, and the ability to ever fully explain what she'd done. But those young Marines who went home to their families, they were alive. That was the only medal that truly mattered. That night, alone in her apartment, Sandra opened a locked box containing photographs from her deployment. Medical staff celebrating a successful surgery. Soldiers she'd saved smiling in recovery. And one image she'd never shown anyone, a thermal scope view of a distant target, the moment before a trigger pull that prevented an attack on a convoy carrying 40 Marines. She'd been both healer and warrior, operating in the gray spaces where conventional roles blurred. History would never know her name or understand her full contribution. The classified reports would eventually be destroyed, the program itself perhaps denied. But somewhere, a Marine was teaching his daughter to ride a bike. Another was returning to college. A third was getting married. They were alive because of decisions made in darkness, by someone who understood that protecting the innocent sometimes required taking action that couldn't be acknowledged. Sandra closed the box and put it away. The mission continued. New threats, new operators, new shadows where quiet professionals worked to keep others safe. And in those shadows, the work of healing and protecting continued, invisible but essential, silent but absolutely necessary. The program had many names over the years. Officially, it didn't exist. But among those who knew, it was called by a different name. The Quiet Ones. Operators who worked in silence, who would never receive public recognition, who accepted that their service would remain unknown. Sandra Chen was one of them. A surgeon who saved lives with a scalpel. A sniper who prevented casualties with precision fire. A warrior who understood that true service meant operating without glory, without recognition, without the possibility of ever being fully understood. She was a silent legend. And there were others still out there, still working in the spaces between light and shadow, still protecting those who would never know their names. That's how it had to be. That's how it would always be. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that some heroes serve in silence and deserve to be remembered even if they can never be named, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this, more quiet professionals who changed the course of events while remaining invisible. Share this story with someone who understands that service doesn't always come with recognition. That some of the most important work happens in shadows. That healing and protecting sometimes require the same hands to do very different work. This is the story of Dr. Sarah Chen. Surgeon. Warrior. Silent legend. Disclaimer: this video is a fictional narrative created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to actual persons, events, or organizations is purely coincidental.